The evening air felt calm when the homeowner moved into the neighborhood, but there was something quiet and strange in the way people looked at them. They had come here hoping for a peaceful life, a place where they could breathe without feeling rushed or judged. For the first few days, everything seemed fine. They unpacked their things, arranged the living room, cleaned the porch, and tried their best to settle in. But slowly, little moments began to show that this new place might not be as warm as they hoped. It started with small things. A group of neighbors stood together near the mailboxes one morning, talking loudly and laughing. When the homeowner walked past and greeted them with a friendly smile, the group barely nodded, then continued their conversation without even giving them space to collect their mail. The homeowner tried not to think too much about it, telling themselves that maybe people were just busy or tired. But something about the way they were ignored stayed in their mind. A few days later, the neighborhood had a small meeting near the community center. The homeowner went there early, hoping to meet people, learn how things worked, and understand the community rules. As they quietly took a seat, people around them kept talking, barely acknowledging their presence. Even when the homeowner politely asked a question about the shared garden area, one of the neighbors brushed it off with a short answer and moved on to another topic. It was as if their voice was too quiet to matter. Still, the homeowner stayed patient. They believed that kindness eventually came back, and that sometimes people needed time to warm up. But things slowly began to shift in a way that didn't feel right. The community had a small walkway along one side of the homes, a place where children played and where neighbors often walked their pets. One morning, the homeowner noticed that some garden tools had been left scattered across the walkway by someone. They picked them up and placed them neatly near the fence so no one would trip. A simple, harmless gesture. Later that day, one of the neighbors approached them with a cold expression. Instead of thanking them, the neighbor accused the homeowner of moving tools that weren't theirs and said they should mind their own space. The homeowner was taken aback. They explained softly that they only moved the tools to prevent someone from falling. But the neighbor wasn't interested in listening and walked off, shaking their head as if the homeowner was the one causing trouble. That small incident became the first hint of something deeper. In the days that followed, whispers began to reach the homeowner's ears. Little comments slipped out of passing conversations. Things like, "They don't understand how things work around here," or "They'll learn to stay out of it soon enough." Every word felt sharp. Even when the people speaking pretended the homeowner wasn't standing close enough to hear, they tried to ignore the comments, staying focused on their own life. They watered their plants, fixed small things inside the house, and continued trying to greet neighbors with a smile. But the coldness didn't fade. Instead, it grew. Whenever the homeowner walked by a group of neighbors talking, the conversation would suddenly change. People would look at them with a strange mix of amusement and dismissal, as if they were waiting for them to make a mistake. One afternoon, the homeowner stepped outside to place their trash at the pickup point. As they walked back toward their porch, two neighbors were talking nearby. They didn't see the homeowner at first. One of them was laughing softly, saying something about how the new one won't last long because they look too gentle for this place. The homeowner froze for a moment, unsure whether to walk away or let them know they were there. When they finally moved, the neighbors noticed and quickly turned silent. Pretending nothing had been said, the homeowner felt a small knot form in their chest. They had never been someone who liked conflict. They preferred peace, understanding, gentle conversations, and treating everyone with respect. They never imagined that something as simple as moving to a new neighborhood would make them feel invisible. Things continued in this uncomfortable way until one specific moment began to change everything. The community walkway, the same one where the tools had been left earlier, had a small crack running through part of it. The homeowner had noticed it growing wider over the weeks and worried someone might trip. So, they sent a polite message to the community group chat, suggesting that maybe it should be fixed soon. Instead of a normal response, the message was met with sarcasm. One person wrote that the homeowner should focus on their own yard instead of trying to manage the whole neighborhood. Another joked that the crack had been there longer than the new neighbor and didn't need attention now. The homeowner stared at their screen, surprised at how simple concerns were twisted into something negative. That message thread became the moment. and many people revealed how they really saw the homeowner. It wasn't just that they ignored them or brushed them off. They truly believed the homeowner had no voice, no influence, no strength. They thought the homeowner was someone they could talk down to, someone who wouldn't push back or say anything. The homeowner felt a quiet frustration rising inside them. It wasn't anger, just a strong, steady feeling that they were being treated unfairly. They had done nothing wrong, yet they were made to feel out of place. That night, they sat alone in their living room, thinking about everything that had happened since they moved in. They wondered why people acted that way, why basic kindness seemed so rare in this community. The next morning, something similar happened again. The homeowner went to attend another small gathering, hoping things might be different. They sat at the back of the group, listening quietly. But when they raised their hand to ask a simple question about the shared parking area, a few people exchanged amused glances. The person leading the meeting skipped over them twice before finally letting them speak. And even then, their question was barely acknowledged. The homeowner felt a slow heaviness settle in their chest. It was one thing to be ignored once or twice. It was something else to be dismissed again and again, as if their opinions or concerns didn't matter at all. But instead of reacting or getting into an argument, they simply watched everyone carefully. They paid attention to how people spoke, how they leaned toward each other, how they whispered to the ones they knew well. The more they observed, the more they understood that some people in the neighborhood had grown too used to acting like they owned everything. They spoke loudly, not because they were right, but because they were used to being heard. And they treated quieter people as if silence meant weakness. But the homeowner wasn't weak. They had lived through things before, things far more challenging than rude neighbors or cold greetings. They knew how to stay calm, how to listen, how to gather information, and how to act only when necessary. And although these neighbors didn't know it yet, the homeowner had a quiet strength that didn't show until the right moment. As the days passed, more small incidents piled up. A neighbor sent a sharp message about the height of their grass even, though it was trimmed fine. Someone else complained about their porch light being too bright, even though it was the same brightness as everyone else's. Another time, a neighbor knocked on their door to complain about a car that wasn't even theirs. None of it made sense. Except for one thing, they all assumed the homeowner wouldn't question any of it. They expected silence, acceptance, and obedience. They thought the homeowner was powerless, but inside, something slowly shifted. The homeowner realized that trying to be friendly wasn't working. They weren't being seen as kind or respectful. They were being seen as easy to push around. One evening, as the homeowner sat on their porch, watching the sun dip behind the houses, they thought back to all the moments when people had dismissed them. The soft comments, the rude messages, the mocking smiles. And for the first time since moving in, they felt something clear and strong. Enough was enough. They didn't want to fight with anyone. They didn't want drama. But they also knew they deserved respect just as much as anyone else in the neighborhood. They weren't going to stay silent anymore. They weren't going to let whispers and rude messages define their place in the community. From that moment on, something in them changed, even if no one else noticed it yet. Their eyes became a little sharper, their mind a little more focused. They started paying attention not just to what people were saying, but to what they were doing, how things worked, who made decisions, and where the real authority came from. And while the neighbors still believed the homeowner was harmless and quiet, they had no idea what was quietly being set in motion. They had no idea that the person they thought was powerless was slowly preparing to stand. Tall, they had no idea that their actions were leading to a moment they would soon regret. Part 1 ends here. The days after that quiet shift. Inside, the homeowner felt different, even if nothing seemed unusual on the surface. On the outside, life looked the same sidewalks, the same houses, the same voices in the distance. But inside, the homeowner carried a new resolve, a quiet strength that was beginning to take shape. They still went about their routine in a calm way, but now they paid close attention to every detail. They noticed how certain neighbors walked with a sense of authority, almost as if they owned the street. They noticed who talked the loudest during meetings, who whispered after them, who handed out suggestions as if they were rules written in stone. And most importantly, they noticed which neighbor stayed silent out of fear of being targeted. One morning, while stepping out to water their small row of plants, the homeowner noticed a letter taped to their door. It was folded neatly, but the tone inside was anything but friendly. It said that their small decorative pots by the steps were not in line with community appearance. The letter wasn't signed by the board or the management. It wasn't official at all. It was simply written by a neighbor pretending to act like they had authority. The homeowner stared at the note for a long moment. They didn't get angry. They didn't even sigh. Instead, they folded the letter and placed it gently inside a small folder they kept on their desk. They had started that folder a few days back after realizing things were getting repetitive. Every message, every complaint, every rude comment, they stored each one quietly. Some might have reacted with frustration, but the homeowner understood something important. Sometimes silence is not weakness. It is strategy. Later that day, while taking out the recycling, another neighbor walked by and gave a forced smile that didn't reach their eyes. "You know," the neighbor said, tilting their head slightly, "people are talking. You should probably try harder to blend in. Just some friendly advice." The homeowner nodded politely, even though the remark wasn't friendly at all. They didn't argue. They didn't defend themselves. They simply watched the neighbor walk away with a tone of superiority in their steps. Inside, though, something clicked. It was becoming clear that some people in this neighborhood simply enjoyed the feeling of control. They liked the idea of telling others how to live, what to do, what to change. And because the homeowner didn't fight back at first, they assumed they could keep pushing. But the homeowner was done letting them think that. That evening, they opened the community rulebook again. It wasn't long or complicated. Most rules were simple and fair, and none of them said anything about decorative pots, porch lights, or the other things neighbors kept complaining about. The homeowner read every line carefully and took quiet notes. While doing so, they remembered how a few nights earlier, a couple of neighbors had been talking loudly in front of the walkway. They were laughing about how the new one seemed too soft to speak up. They joked about how easy it was to make them follow any instruction. The homeowner had heard every word clearly from their open window. That memory gave them even more strength. The next morning, they decided to take a simple walk around the community. The sun was warm, the air soft, and the walkway peaceful. Children played near the swings, and the sound of someone trimming a hedge echoed through the air. As the homeowner walked silently, they saw the same neighbor who had left the rude note standing near the gate. The neighbor lifted their chin and approached with a smile that didn't reach their eyes. "Did you take care of those pots I mentioned?" They asked in a tone that sounded more like an order. The homeowner met their gaze calmly. "There is no rule against pots by the steps," they said softly. "So I'll be keeping them." The neighbor blinked, surprised. It was the first time the homeowner had spoken back firmly. Without another word, the neighbor turned and walked away quickly, clearly irritated. That small moment gave the homeowner something they hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of control. But the pushback didn't end there. Later that week, the community app suddenly showed a message complaining about someone leaving their trash bin out too long. The description matched the homeowner's schedule, even though many others left their bins out for just as long. It was obvious the message was meant to embarrass them publicly. Instead of responding in anger, the homeowner took a picture of their bin right by the pickup time, exactly where it should be. They added the screenshot to their growing folder. Patterns were beginning to form, and the homeowner wanted every detail saved. It wasn't just one or two neighbors anymore. It was a small group who believed they were untouchable, who thought their voices were the loudest in every situation. They didn't expect someone like the homeowner to be paying attention, to be documenting, to be learning quietly. Another incident came when the homeowner returned from the store and found a notice slipped into their mailbox, not from the board, but from one of the same few neighbors. It accused the homeowner of blocking community access because their car was parked slightly closer to the curb than usual. But the homeowner could clearly see 3 other cars parked the exact same way. They pulled out their phone and took pictures not only of their own car, but also of the others. They knew this wasn't about rules. It was about power. These neighbors were trying to pressure them into staying small. That night, the homeowner sat at their dining table and looked through the folder. It had grown thicker: screenshots, photos, printed messages, and notes about comments they had overheard. They took a deep breath and felt something steady inside. They weren't gathering these things out of bitterness. They were gathering them because they knew one day they would need them, and that day was coming sooner than the neighbors expected. The next major incident came on a Sunday morning. The homeowner was sitting on their porch, enjoying a quiet moment with a warm drink, when they saw two neighbors walking toward their house with irritation written across their faces. One of them pointed at a small patch of grass near the sidewalk. "Your grass is too tall again," the neighbor said sharply. The homeowner looked at the grass. It was perfectly trimmed, shorter, in fact, than several other lawns nearby. "It looks fine to me," the homeowner said calmly. "It's not fine," the other neighbor insisted. "We can call the board about this," the homeowner didn't argue. Instead, they simply pulled out their phone and took a picture of the grass with both neighbors standing right behind it. The neighbors stared, confused and annoyed. "Why are you taking pictures?" one of them asked. "For my records," the homeowner said gently. "Just to keep things clear." The neighbors exchanged nervous looks. Something about the homeowner's tone told them things were changing. From that day forward, people began watching the homeowner differently. They didn't know what the homeowner was doing, but they sensed something was different. The quiet person they once dismissed was no longer agreeing to everything. They weren't stepping back or apologizing for things that weren't wrong. The homeowner still didn't raise their voice or argue, but now they responded intelligently, calmly, and with proof. Their stillness wasn't the same as before. It now carried meaning, and the neighbors didn't like it. One evening, as the homeowner walked back from the mailbox, they overheard two neighbors whispering near a parked car. "We should keep an eye on them," one whispered. "They're starting to get bold." "It's fine," the other replied. "They don't have any real power here." The homeowner kept walking, pretending they hadn't heard. But their calm heart felt something sharp, something clear. If the neighbors believed the homeowner had no power, then that belief would be their biggest mistake. The next week, the community scheduled another meeting. The homeowner attended quietly, sitting in a corner as usual. People barely looked at them. A few whispered. A couple of neighbors exchanged smug glances. But the homeowner was ready. During the meeting, someone complained loudly about how some residents were breaking rules. They looked directly at the homeowner while speaking. The room grew tense. The homeowner stayed quiet until the speaker finished. Then, in a calm voice, they said, "Could we go through the actual rules? I think there may be some misunderstandings." The room fell silent. The homeowner reached into their bag and pulled out a neatly organized folder, the same one holding every detail from the last several weeks. They placed it gently on the table. The neighbors' faces stiffened. The homeowner didn't open it yet, but the message was clear. They were not alone. Not unprepared, not powerless, and that small, simple moment the folder placed silently on the table felt like the start of something big. A shift, a turning point, the quiet beginning of a much larger change. The neighbors who had been pushing them around were starting to realize that something was coming, something they had never expected. They would soon regret underestimating the person they thought was too quiet to fight back. Part 2 ends. Here the homeowner woke up the next morning feeling strangely calm, like something inside them had settled into place. It wasn't confidence exactly, but a sense of direction. They knew things were building up, that the small quiet steps they had taken were leading towards something bigger. And this time, they were ready to walk into whatever came next. The folder, which had started as a simple place to put one or two messages, had now become a powerful tool. Every screenshot, every rude note, every picture it was all carefully stored inside. Not because the homeowner wanted to make trouble, but because they finally understood the truth. Some people only respected those who stood their ground. The neighbors who had been loudest were growing nervous, though they tried hard not to show it. They whispered among themselves whenever the homeowner walked by. They avoided direct eye contact, and they didn't send any new fake notices for a few days. The silence in the neighborhood felt heavy, like everyone was waiting to see what the homeowner would do. But the homeowner stayed quiet, watching. They didn't rush. They didn't confront anyone. They simply kept living their life, doing what they normally did, watering plants, sweeping the porch, going on calm evening walks, yet every step was more aware now. Every moment had meaning. A few afternoons later, the homeowner was returning from the store when they saw the community board members gathered near the parking area. Some neighbors were talking to them, pointing in different directions and using animated gestures. When the homeowner walked past, the group suddenly fell silent. A few glanced over with forced smiles. The homeowner didn't stop. They simply observed quietly and continued walking, but inside. Something told them this had something to do with them. Later that evening, a message popped up in the community app. It said that there would be another meeting to discuss ongoing concerns. The wording was vague, but the homeowner wasn't surprised. They knew exactly how these neighbors operated. When they couldn't push someone directly, they tried to do it in a public setting, where they hoped group pressure would help them. Instead of feeling nervous, the homeowner felt a calm rise inside them. They opened their folder and flipped through the pages, organizing everything neatly. They weren't planning to start an argument, but they weren't going to let anyone twist the truth anymore. The day of the meeting arrived. It was held in the usual place, the small room beside the community office. People filled the chairs, some chatting quietly, others glancing around with curiosity. The homeowner walked in, greeted by a few polite nods and a few cold stares. They took a seat near the center this time, not in the corner. One of the neighbors, same one who had mocked them before, stood up to speak. "We've had some issues lately," they began, trying to sound calm. "Some residents are not following community guidelines. It's causing disruptions, and we want to make sure everyone is doing their part." Their eyes moved toward the homeowner. People in the room shifted uncomfortably. The homeowner watched quietly, their hands resting on the folder. Another neighbor stood up. "Yes, we've had complaints. Some people don't understand that we have rules here, and things need to stay organized." Their voice had a sharpness meant to embarrass. The homeowner let them finish. They didn't interrupt or react. Once both neighbors sat down, the room fell silent for a moment. Then the homeowner slowly stood up. Their heart was steady, their voice calm. "May I ask which rules were broken?" the homeowner said, looking toward the board. The board members glanced at one another awkwardly. They shifted through their papers, but none of them looked confident. The people who made the complaints hadn't given clear evidence, just loud voices. One of the neighbors quickly spoke up, trying to fill the silence. "Well, the trash bins." The homeowner gently opened their folder and pulled out a photo. It showed the trash bin exactly where it should be. They placed the photo on the table. The neighbor's words froze. Another neighbor tried. The grass. The homeowner placed another picture on the table, showing their grass perfectly trimmed. Murmur spread through the room. The third neighbor tried to mention the flower pots. Again, the homeowner placed a screenshot of the community rules, clearly showing that decorative items were allowed. People in the room exchanged looks. Some began whispering to one another. The board members leaned closer to examine the photos. The homeowner didn't raise their voice. They didn't smile or smirk. They simply said, "Everything I've been told was a rule is not written in the guidelines." These were personal complaints, not real violations. One board member cleared their throat, embarrassed. These aren't violations," they admitted. The neighbors who had been complaining sat stiffly, their confidence beginning to crumble. The homeowner continued, "I've lived quietly here. I've tried to be respectful, but I think there has been some misunderstanding or perhaps some personal issues being disguised as community concerns." That sentence hung in the air. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't insulting, but it exposed the truth in a way that made the loud neighbors shift. Uncomfortably in their seats, another board member finally spoke. "We appreciate your organization and clarity. If anyone has complaints, they must follow the proper process. Personal disagreements shouldn't be turned into official notices." The neighbors looked down. The tension in the room slowly softened. Not entirely gone, but different now. People were beginning to see that the homeowner wasn't someone to be pushed around. They were patient, observant, and prepared. After the meeting ended, several quiet neighbors approached the homeowner with small smiles. They weren't part of the loud group. They were the kind of people who preferred to stay away from drama, but had been watching everything quietly. One of them said softly, "You handled that well? I'm glad you spoke up." The homeowner thanked them. It felt good, not because they wanted praise, but because they finally felt seen. As they walked home that evening, the air felt lighter. The sky had a gentle glow as the sun set behind the rooftops. But even with this small victory, the homeowner knew things weren't over yet. The loud neighbors didn't like losing control. They weren't going to give up easily. The next few days proved that. The rude notes stopped, but the stares grew sharper. Conversations near the mailbox would suddenly go silent the moment the homeowner approached. A few neighbors even walked farther around the sidewalk to avoid passing by them. But the homeowner didn't mind. Silence was better than lies. And then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A quiet knock came at the homeowner's door. When they opened it, they found someone from the neighborhood who rarely spoke at meetings. They always kept to themselves, never joining the gossiping groups. They looked nervous that day. "I wanted to talk to you," they said softly. The homeowner welcomed them inside. They sat at the dining table, and the neighbor took a deep breath. "I've seen what's been happening to you," they said quietly. "You're not imagining it. They've done this before to other people. They try to control everyone. They expect people to stay scared. But you didn't. And I respect that. I wanted to tell you that you're not alone. And I have something you should see." They carefully placed a small envelope on the table. Inside were printed screenshots, messages from the same loud neighbors complaining about the homeowner months before they even met them properly, plotting ways to keep them in line, and mocking their quiet personality. The homeowner looked at the messages with calm eyes. They weren't shocked, but it confirmed everything. The neighbor continued, "I didn't want to get involved before. But after what you did at the meeting, I realized maybe someone needs to stand with you." The homeowner thanked them sincerely. It meant more than the neighbor realized. After the visitor left, the homeowner placed the new screenshots into the folder. The picture was becoming very clear now. The loud neighbors hadn't just reacted randomly. They had targeted the homeowner intentionally. But now, the homeowner had proof. The next community meeting was coming up soon, and this time, things would be different. The homeowner spent the next few days preparing quietly. They reviewed every rule, every photo, every message. They didn't want to attack anyone. They just wanted fairness and respect. They wanted the truth to be seen without shouting, without drama. On the day of the next meeting, something unexpected happened. When the homeowner walked in, several people nodded at them. A few offered small smiles. People who had stayed silent before were now showing support. The loud neighbors entered the room as well. But they looked uneasy. Their confidence was no longer effortless. Their eyes kept shifting toward the homeowner. During the meeting, someone brought up recent tensions in the community. The board wanted things to settle peacefully. They asked if anyone wanted to speak about it. The homeowner stood up again. Their voice was steady, their hands calm. "I want this neighborhood to be peaceful," they said simply. "But peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from fairness." They opened their folder again this time, revealing the new screenshots. Gasps filled the room. The loud neighbors went pale. The homeowner didn't raise their voice. They didn't accuse. They simply let the words written by those neighbors speak for themselves. The board members read the messages with wide eyes, clearly disturbed. After a long moment, the board announced that an investigation would take place. False complaints, harassment, misuse of community authority would not be tolerated. The room buzzed with whispers, and the loud neighbors sat frozen. Realizing the gravity of what they had done as the meeting ended, many neighbors approached the homeowner again. This time, not just with small smiles, but with genuine respect, because they saw the truth clearly now. The homeowner walked home in silence, the cool night air brushing against their skin. They didn't feel triumphant. They didn't feel like they had won anything. They just felt steady. For the first time since moving into Thea, woke up the next morning feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the last days. But instead of fear, there was a new kind of strength inside him. It wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, steady, almost calm. Like someone who had finally realized that he wasn't actually alone, and he wasn't powerless like everyone assumed. He didn't know what the day would bring. But he knew one thing: he wasn't going to step back or let anyone walk over him again. The sunlight slipped through the curtains, and for a moment he sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the steady hum of the neighborhood waking up. Kids shouting, a dog barking, a car starting. All these little sounds made him realize how normal everything looked from the outside. Even though his world had been turned upside down, he rubbed his face and took a deep breath before standing up. Today wasn't going to be normal. Nothing had been normal for a while. He made tea and stood by the window while it cooled. He kept replaying everything that happened, especially the meeting the day before. The looks on certain faces, the way some people tried to talk over him, the way they thought they could twist things and make him feel small. They underestimated him. They always had, but that was changing now. He stepped outside after a while, and the cool air felt good on his face. A couple of neighbors gave him quick nods. They looked curious, maybe even supportive, but unsure if they should say anything. He didn't blame them. When someone is facing a powerful group, people are scared to stand too close. As he walked toward the community area, he noticed one of the older neighbors sitting on her small porch. She gave him a smile that held a kind of warmth he hadn't felt in days. "Rough week?" she asked softly. He let out a breath. "Something like that." She nodded as if she already knew. "Just remember, strength doesn't always have to shout to be real." He thanked her and kept walking, her words settling in his mind like a quiet truth. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to fight with noise. He just needed to stand firm when he reached the community building. The person who handled the office work was already there, sorting through papers. She looked up when he entered and gave him a polite smile, the kind people give when they don't fully know what's going on but can sense something is off. "You're early," she said. "I need a few things," he replied. Calmly, she gestured toward the rack of documents and forms. "Take whatever you need." He walked over and picked out a few papers, the ones he had already studied the night before. He double-checked everything, making sure every detail was right. He didn't want to show up unprepared again. He was done being caught off guard. As he flipped through the papers, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, he saw one of the same people who had been giving him a hard time earlier in the week. The man froze for a second, surprised to see him there. Then he tried to look casual, but the tension was obvious. "Oh, you're here early," the man said. "Seems like it," he replied, not looking away. The man shifted his weight. "There's no hard feelings about the meeting, right?" "You know how these things go." He didn't answer right away. He took his time, folded the papers, and finally said, "Things don't go the way you think they do anymore." The man frowned slightly but didn't say anything. Maybe he understood. Maybe he didn't, but he walked away, and that was enough. As he left the building, he noticed more people outside than usual. It was like the rumors had started spreading. People who had ignored everything before were suddenly watching closely. They knew something was happening. They could feel the shift. He walked home and sat at his small table. He opened the papers, checked them again, and then began writing. His handwriting wasn't perfect, but every stroke was steady. He wasn't rushing. Every word mattered. Everything had to be exact, clear, and firm. Hours passed slowly. He didn't look at his phone, didn't check messages, didn't let distractions drag him away from what he needed to finish. When he finally put the pen down, his hand felt heavy, but his heart felt lighter. He leaned back and stared at the papers. This was the moment when a person finally steps into their own strength, not loud, not angry, but certain. He stood, folded everything neatly, and placed them into a small folder. The folder felt heavier than paper. It felt like a shield. Afternoon came, and he walked back toward the center of the neighborhood. The sunlight had shifted, making long shadows across the ground. The air felt tense in a quiet way, like people were waiting for something they couldn't name. When he reached the building again, few people were already standing around. They weren't part of the problem, but they weren't sure how to help either. They just watched him with a mixture of curiosity and hope. He nodded at them and stepped inside. This time, he wasn't nervous. He wasn't unsure. The room felt different, or maybe he just felt different inside it. One of the people who had tried to intimidate him before raised an eyebrow when he walked in. "Back again?" she asked. He placed the folder on the table. "I'm here to submit these." Her expression shifted slightly as she took the folder. She flipped through the papers, her eyes moving fast. The surprise grew with every page she read. You did all of this already?" she asked. "Yes." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "This is thorough." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Suddenly the room felt like it had shifted. The power that had been held by others was no longer with them. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was quiet, like the moment before a storm changes direction. A couple more people entered the room. They glanced at him, then at the woman holding the papers. One of them whispered something, and the woman shook her head sharply. "He filed everything," she said quietly. The others looked at him with a kind of disbelief, like they were seeing him clearly for the first time. One of them stepped forward. "Look, maybe we should talk about this. Maybe we can work something out." He met their eyes without stepping back. "I'm open to conversations, but not to being pushed around." The person opened their mouth to argue, but then closed it. The realization was settling in. He wasn't the person they thought he was. After a long silence, the woman holding the folder finally said, "We'll review this today." "Good," he said calmly. He turned and walked out of the building. The people outside watched him, eyes wide, like they had just witnessed something unexpected. He didn't puff his chest or raise his voice. He simply walked with the quiet weight of someone who knew he had taken control of his story. When he reached home, he felt a deep tiredness, but also a strange peace, the kind that comes when a person does something difficult but necessary. He sat down in his living room, closed his eyes, and let the silence surround him. The world outside kept moving, but inside his home, everything finally felt still. He didn't know what the final outcome would be. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't scared of what would happen next. He knew one thing for sure. Those who thought he was powerless were starting to regret it. The next part of the story was coming. He could feel the momentum building. But for now, he just let himself breathe, preparing for whatever came next. He woke up earlier than usual, long before the sun climbed into the sky. The room was still dark, quiet, and cold, but something in him felt warm and steady. It wasn't excitement, and it wasn't fear. It was a kind of clarity that comes only when someone has been pushed for too long, finally reaches the point where they stop holding back. He lay there for a moment, listening to the soft silence of the morning. In the past weeks, he had gotten used to waking up with heaviness in his chest, thinking of all the things waiting for him outside his door, but today felt different. Today felt like the last chapter of something he had never asked to be part of, something he had been dragged into, tested by, and changed through. He got out of bed slowly, careful with his steps, as though he didn't want to disturb the quiet strength that had settled inside him. He washed his face, made a simple breakfast, and sat by the window with a warm cup in his hands. The sky outside slowly brightened, turning from dark blue to soft gray. The neighborhood was waking up. A car passed by. A door somewhere slammed shut. Birds made little sounds from the trees. Everything was alive and moving. But he felt strangely still. He thought back to the earlier days, when he had felt small, unprotected, and unsure. When every meeting, every demand, every letter felt like a stone added to his shoulders. When people looked at him with judgment or superiority, expecting him to fold. When certain voices spoke over him instead of to him, assuming he would say nothing. But he had spoken, and he wasn't done. After finishing his breakfast, he pulled out the folder he had prepared. He checked everything again, even though he already knew it was complete. Then he took a deep breath, grabbed his jacket, and stepped outside. The air was cool. A faint breeze brushed across his face as he walked down the road toward the community building. People were out, some sweeping their porches, some walking their pets, some heading to work. A few eyes followed him, not in a hostile way, more like they sensed something important was about to happen. One neighbor nodded at him and said quietly, "You got this?" He didn't know the man well, but the words felt grounding. When he reached the building, he saw more people gathered near the entrance than usual. Maybe they were just curious. Maybe they were concerned. Maybe they simply had nothing better to do. But their presence made the air feel heavier. He walked inside. The room was filled with scattered papers, chairs, and people moving around. But everyone seemed to pause when they saw him. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but in that subtle way where eyes follow someone with growing respect or curiosity. The same people who had tried to control the situation, poor, were already seated. Their expressions were mixed annoyance, uncertainty, and something that looked strangely close to unease. He sat down calmly. A moment later, the woman who handled most of the paperwork cleared her throat. "We've reviewed everything," she said, her voice more careful than before. He nodded, and she hesitated, glancing at the others, then back at him. "It's clear. Everything is in order. Your paperwork is complete. Your reasoning is valid. There weren't any mistakes." One of the others, the man who had once spoken to him like he wasn't worth listening to, shifted uncomfortably. "We might have misjudged some things," he admitted, his tone forced. He didn't say anything. He let them talk. The woman continued, "We would like to resolve this without any more tension. We understand now that you were treated unfairly." There it was. Not an apology exactly, but something close. Something that showed their certainty had cracked. Something that proved they now saw him as someone they could no longer dismiss. He leaned back in his chair slowly. "I'm not here for tension," he said quietly. "I'm here for fairness." Long silence filled the room. Finally, one of the older members spoke. "You're right. And going forward, we'll make sure everything is handled properly." That line, "going forward," hit him deeper than he expected. It wasn't just about what they owed him now. It was about what they couldn't take from him anymore. As the meeting continued, the conversation became more honest, more balanced, more human. People who had once spoken to him with dismissiveness now spoke with caution and respect. He stayed calm through all of it, not out of pride, but because he finally understood that strength didn't require shouting. It required knowing your worth. When everything was finally agreed upon, he stood and gathered his folder. Before he walked out, the woman behind the table said softly, "You handled all of this with a lot of patience. Most people would have lost their temper." He looked at her for a moment. Being patient doesn't make someone powerless. The room went quiet again. He walked out feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The sun was fully up now, warming the ground. A few neighbors were still waiting outside. When they saw him, they stepped closer, curiosity on their faces. "Well?" one of them asked. "It's done," he said. Their shoulders eased, and a few of them smiled. Someone clapped him gently on the back. Another said, "Good. About time someone stood up." As he walked back home, he felt something shift inside him. Not in a loud, victorious way, but in a peaceful way. He had walked through something heavy, something unfair, something meant to break him down, and he had made it through. Without losing himself, he opened his front door and sat down on the couch. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly at ease. The fight was over. The noise was gone. His home felt like a safe place again. He didn't rush to call anyone, or post anything, or share what happened. He simply closed his eyes and breathed. Later that day, he took a walk around the neighborhood. People who once looked past him now nodded respectfully. Not because he had threatened them, not because he had fought loudly, but because he had stood firm, steady, and fair. He realized then that people often confuse silence with weakness. They think someone who doesn't shout is someone who won't stand up. They think calmness means fear, but he had shown them the truth, and the truth had changed everything. As he walked toward the small park near his home, He saw the older woman he had spoken 2 days before, sitting on a bench. She smiled when she saw him. "So?" she asked. "It's sorted," he said. She nodded knowingly. "I told you." Strength doesn't always have to shout. He sat beside her for a moment, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze. Children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. The world felt right again. He didn't feel powerful. He didn't feel victorious. He simply felt whole. And that was enough. When he finally walked back home, he whispered to himself, "They thought I was powerless." But they were wrong. And he knew he would never forget the lesson he had learned, not about them, but about himself. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He had already proven everything that mattered.